to the 5 strands of reading. So the 5 strands of reading were developed by the National Reading Panel. So in 1997, Congress appointed the National Reading Panel to review reading research and determine the most effective methods for teaching. And what the National Reading Panel did is they reviewed 100,000 studies. So good science is replicatable over time and over many locations. So one of the very confusing things about reading is that you can come up with an individual study that says anything. And so you have to be careful as teachers and administrators to not focus on individual studies, but what are all of the studies pointing at? And only with a very broad literature review, which is actually beyond the scope of an individual, could they come up with what is all of the research pointing at? And what they found was that there are 5 components of reading. So now, on our reading curriculum, we will see these 5 essential components of reading listed. But the question then becomes, well, what order are they taught? And actually, what are each of these components? So I have seen places where fluency is the first skill, and then phonemic awareness, and then comprehension. I sat in one training where comprehension was the beginning skill, because reading's all about making meaning. Therefore, if a student is reading a book and they misread a word but they've made meaning out of it, it's fine. Or if they're reading pictures, that's reading. And then comes fluency, and then some phonics. Which order should they be taught? And how should each skill be taught? These are really important questions. So I like to begin the training with a couple analogies to help us understand this. The first one is reading is like building a foundation. And when I build this foundation, what am I going to build here? A house. And so when I'm building this foundation, it starts with phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is the understanding that words are comprised of individual sounds. The next layer of this foundation is fluency. And what I mean by this is the mastery of the skill of phonemic awareness to the point of automaticity. So you are able to do these skills quickly and easily. You've mastered it. And we are going to dig into each of these skills later in the training. My purpose here is to show how they fit together. Then, after you've developed phonemic awareness skills, the next skill is systematic phonics, which we define as an accurate written code which translates sounds into a visual image. And then we have the skill of fluency here, which is the mastery of the skill of systematic phonics to the point of automaticity. So it's like we're building up this foundation. Then we have vocabulary development, which is learning the meaning of new words and morphemes through direct and indirect instruction, and developing tools to discover the meaning of an unknown word. Next, we have comprehension skills, which are strategies a reader may employ to better comprehend a text. And on top of all this, we have the rest of our education. Every other subject is dependent upon a student being able to read well, so that means it's dependent on these 5 strands of reading. So here, I have built this foundation, and I can build a house on it. But what could I build on this foundation? A skyscraper, something much larger than a house. Yeah, so the question becomes, how do we build that foundation? How deep do we build it? And it's really interesting. We're in Rochester, Minnesota today, home of the Mayo Clinic. And when the Mayo Clinic was building one of their buildings, they dug the foundation much deeper than they needed to because they planned to add stories many years later. If they hadn't dug that foundation deeper, could they have added stories? No. So we want students to have a depth of learning in these foundational skills. Well, building a foundation is really too simple of a way to understand this. I think it helps us understand some of the progression, but in reality, learning to read is much more of an organic process and more complicated. So I like to compare it to growing a tree. And when I look at this tree, I'm really excited about all the books. right? Like we want our kids to love books and to love learning and to love reading, but a good, healthy tree has a lot of roots. And healthy trees have root systems that are as big or larger than the part of the tree that you can see. And yet these are underground. They're not visible to us, but they're essential to a healthy tree. So I want us to watch this seed grow. And what do you notice about how a seed grows? What grows first? Roots. And then as the stem is growing, do the roots stop growing? No. And I think one of the mistakes we make as educators is sometimes we dig some roots or we help grow some roots and then we stop teaching the foundational skills because they're emerging as readers. But in order to become strong readers, they need to have a strong foundational skills. So a tree grows all by starting with a seed. And I like to think of the seed as reading readiness. You know, you plant the seed with young children by reading to them, by surrounding them with books. It's the reading readiness skills. But when it begins to grow, that first root is phonemic awareness, and we must start with phonemic awareness. And then another root grows, systematic phonics. So we're now connecting the sounds of the language to the symbols of the language. And then they begin to use some of these skills and they start to develop some fluency, reading words, and vocabulary and comprehension skills, until they develop into these flourishing readers. So this analogy, I think, helps us to understand that readers grow in this more complicated way. And so as teachers, we need to be helping them grow strong roots while also developing comprehension skills and fluency, that we don't stop developing those foundational skills. This is another way to look at it. And I think this is a really powerful way because systematic phonics, morphology, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, spelling rules, phonograms, Greek and Latin roots, these are all kind of under the surface. And then fluency is the automaticity of this. It like brings this up to the branches of the tree, which is the joy of reading, making predictions, supporting facts, reading comprehension, poetry, the part that we see that we want students to grasp. So a lot of times what I see in education is that we are developing the foundational skills, but in a very chaotic manner. They're not systematically developed, and that means that the student's whole education kind of crumbles because we haven't systematically put them together. We're teaching them, but not thoroughly and not in an order that makes sense. Or we're starting completely backwards. Instead of starting with phonemic awareness, we're starting with reading comprehension, and that leads to a lot of struggles for students. So we all have the same goal, right? That students learn to read and comprehend. But the question becomes, how do we put these skills together? So I'm hoping that this has helped you to understand how those fit. And these 5 strands of reading are what I call the critical thinking skills for language learning. So these are the pieces that help us think critically about words. They help us to understand language. They help us to understand how English works, and they help us to learn new languages. So on our website, we've put together a new microsite. And if you go out to that microsite, you'll see a presentation of this information like this. So if this was helpful for you, this is a place that you can review that, and you can look at that, or you can share that with other teachers or other parents or other tutors who are interested.